The woman had been sleeping under the stall for 11 nights before anyone counted. Not sleeping the way people sleep in beds with the weight of a quiet room around them. Sleeping the way animals sleep, one eye open, back against the wooden post, her two children pressed against either side of her so tight that when one of them shifted in the night, she felt it in her ribs. The market on Macola Street in Accra closed at 7. The stall vendors pulled their tarps down and padlocked their crates and went home to kitchens with light in them. Adesi Okafor stayed. She arranged the children first. Emeka on the left, 5 years old, his breath already slowing into sleep before she'd even settled him. Simi on the right, 8 years old enough to know not to ask questions anymore, old enough to fold herself small without being told. Adesi set the black plastic bag between her feet and sat with her back straight against the post the way her mother had taught her to sit at a table. Not because the post was comfortable, because she had decided 6 months ago that the day she stopped sitting up straight was the day something in her would go permanently sideways. She pressed her back flat against the wood and waited for morning. She did not know that on the 12th morning, a woman buying tomatoes would look down between the crates and see her. She did not know what that woman would do next. Adesi Miriam Okafor was 31 years old and weighed 49 kilograms. On the morning she left the house on Awutu Lane with two children and a plastic bag. The 49 kilograms was not her natural weight. Her natural weight had been 58 kilograms at the start of the year when she was still eating 2 full meals a day and could button the blue dress without breathing in. By March she had stopped eating lunch. By June she had stopped counting what she ate because the counting made her dizzy. The blue dress was folded into the plastic bag along with 3 pairs of children's underwear, a green exercise book, Emeka's inhaler, and a Nokia charger that no longer fit any phone she owned. She had brought the charger anyway. It had been her mother's. Her mother had owned it for 4 years and kept it on the windowsill next to a small bottle of Yardley lavender and a photograph of the 3 of them that Adesi could no longer look at directly. She smelled faintly of the shea butter she had rubbed into the children's scalps that morning with the last half-inch from a container she'd been rationing since April. Under the shea butter was something else. The particular smell of a body kept clean with cold water and effort, the smell of someone who had refused to stop washing, even when it required real sacrifice to do so. The cotton wrapper she wore was a deep burgundy with a thin gold border along the hem. It had been her mother's too. She had altered it herself 8 months ago with a needle and thread she'd bought from the woman at stall 44, taking in 4 inches at the waist so it would sit right on her frame. She had done it by hand in the light of a kerosene lamp over 2 evenings, picking out the stitches twice before she was satisfied. The wrapper was clean. She had washed it in a plastic basin 3 days ago, using half a bar of key soap, and let it dry in the air behind the market boundary wall before folding it and putting it back on. What she wanted, what she was trying to do was simple. Find a single room, one room, even a room in a compound where she would have to share the latrine, where the walls were the painted cinderblock kind that sweated in the rainy season. One room where she could put the children down and close a door, that was all. She had 1,480 naira in the cloth pocket she had sewn into the inside of the wrapper at the hip. She had counted it 4 times since Friday. The amount did not change. What had brought her here was the kind of thing that takes years to arrive but arrives in a single morning. Her husband Tabena had not hit her. She needed people to understand that when she eventually explained. He had not hit the children. He was not a violent man in the way people mean when they say violent. He did not raise his hands. He raised his voice and then his silences and then, finally, one morning in August, his absence. He left on a Tuesday, and by Thursday she understood he was not coming back in the way he had sometimes not come back for a day or two. The landlord arrived on the Saturday. He had a letter. He had 2 men with him who were patient and polite and terrible. She had until the 1st of the month. She had 9 days. She used 7 of them looking for a room she could afford, and 2 of them moving out. She had 1 person in Accra who knew her name and would open a door. Her mother's friend Auntie Cynthia on the Tama motorway side, a woman of 63 with a small flat and a large heart, but a son who had moved back in with 3 grandchildren and whose spare room was already a second bedroom. Auntie Cynthia had fed them dinner on the first night and held Adesi's hands and cried for her in the way that older women cry when they recognize something they have survived themselves. She had said, "Stay as long as you need. but the flat had one bathroom and 5 children, and Daisy had felt the weight of being the extra body with a precision that pressed against her chest every. After 4 nights, she had folded the children's things back into the plastic bag and told Auntie Cynthia she had found a room. She had not found a room. The stall she chose was at the far west end of the market, set back slightly from the main row, belonging to a man named Kweku who sold dried goods and left his crates stacked in a configuration that created not quite a room but a space. 3 wooden crates on 2 sides, the stall board at the back, the tarp overhead on its frame. Wide enough for the 3 of them if they lay close. Hidden enough that the night watchman on his rounds came within 4 meters twice and had not looked down into it once. On the first night she had lain awake from 7 in the evening until somewhere past 2 in the morning, listening to the sounds of the market settling, the distant generators, the dog that barked from the direction of the cold store, the taxis, the rain once that came for 40 minutes and stopped. She had covered the children with her own wrapper and sat without it and been cold. On the 4th night, Emeka had coughed twice, and she had pressed his inhaler to his mouth and held her own breath until the coughing stopped. On the 7th night, Simi had asked, very quietly so as not to be heard, whether they would be here forever. Daisy had pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and said, "No." She had said it with the full weight of a promise, even though she did not know, in that moment, how to keep it. The green exercise book was where she wrote everything. Not a journal, a plan. She had begun it on the 2nd night in the light from the far street lamp that reached just far enough to write by. Names of boarding houses. Weekly rates, she had been quoted. A calculation of what she would need. She had been a bookkeeper. She knew how to build a table of numbers and read what they were telling her. The table was telling her that at her current rate, selling gari from a borrowed Bolnil stall 16 for 6 hours a day, she was short by 11,000 naira a month of the cheapest room she had found. She had underlined the 11,000 twice, not because she needed to remember it, because she needed to see it written down by her own hand, so she would not let herself believe she was imagining the difficulty. She woke the children at 5:40 every morning. Before the vendors began arriving, she took them to the public convenience at the edge of the market and paid 50 pesewas each for them to wash. She combed Simi's hair with a wide-tooth comb she kept in the plastic bag. She checked Emeka's inhaler. She bought a single sachet of Tom Brown porridge from the woman at the gate and divided it into 3 parts and fed the children first. She did not rush them. She let Emeka eat slowly, which was how he ate, and she did not check the time while he did it, though she knew exactly what time it was. By 6:40 she had the children in place at the gari bowl, and by 7 she was working, and by 7 the market had opened fully, and the 3 of them had been woven into its ordinary business for 20 minutes before anyone who arrived after 7 would have known they had spent the night there at all. On the 12th morning, at 11 minutes past 9, a woman in a white Ankara blouse with a wax print bag on her arm stopped at the tomato cellar 2 stalls down from stall 16 and began selecting tomatoes. She was perhaps 55, perhaps 60. Her hair was fully silver and pressed flat against her head, and she wore small silver earrings that caught the morning light when she turned. Her name was Constance Owusu Boteng. The tomato seller knew her by name, and they discussed the price of tomatoes for 90 seconds with the detailed seriousness that women in that market brought to price negotiations, which was to say they treated it like a contract and not a conversation. It was while she was counting the tomatoes back into the woman's bag that Constance turned her head and looked down the row, and her eyes passed over the gari bowl, and over Emeka sitting behind it, and over Simi beside him helping a customer scoop, and then up to Adizi, standing straight behind the bowl with her hands folded in front of her, and their eyes met. Constance did not look away. She did not look away the way most people looked away from something they recognized as difficulty. The small avoidance, the gaze redirected toward a phone or a middle distance. She held the eye contact for long enough that Daisy felt it land. Then she finished with the tomatoes and paid and put the bag over her arm and walked toward Daisy's stall. She bought a measure of gari. She did not need gari. Daisy could see that she did not need gari from the quality of her shoes and the way she held the small bag that Daisy had, filled loosely, the way someone holds something they have not organized space for. She paid, and she looked at the children again. Then she looked back at Adaise. She said, "How long?" Adaise set the coin on the edge of the bowl. She said, 11 nights. She said it the way she said everything now. Matter of fact, no color on it, because color was a luxury she had decided to postpone until she had a room with a door. Constance said, "Come tonight." She gave the name of a street. She said, "After you close." She said it the way certain women of a specific age say things, not as an invitation that could be declined, but as an arrangement that had already been decided. She put her wax print bag back over her arm and walked out of the row. Adaze watched her go. She set the gurry scoop down on the bowl. She did not pick it up again for 4 minutes. If this story is already landing somewhere real inside you, subscribe now, because what Constance Owusu-Boateng was carrying in that house on Norte Street was something Adaze was never supposed to find, and something the man who had built the house never thought he would have to answer for. She came. Of course she came. She came because at 7 in the evening, when the market closed, and she had folded the tarp and straightened the crates and organized Kwiku's dried goods into their careful order, she did this every night without having been asked. Her contribution to the man who did not know she was sleeping under his livelihood. She took the children by the hands and walked 14 blocks to the street Constance had named. The street was quiet and tree-lined, and the houses on it were set back from the road behind walls with metal gates. At the third gate on the left there was a small brass nameplate with one word on it. It said, Owusu-Boateng. Adaze looked at it for a moment. Then she pressed the bell. The house was large and orderly and smelled of something she would later identify as lavender floor polish and the particular smell of rooms that are dusted properly, a smell she had almost forgotten. Constance brought food. She brought it to a table set with plates, not a pot placed on a counter, and she told the children to sit, and she filled their plates herself. She did not comment on how quickly Emeka ate. She did not say anything about the plastic bag or ask to know the full story that night. She showed Adaze a room at the back of the house with 2 beds. She said, "Sleep first." She said, "There is time tomorrow." She brought towels. She brought Emeka a cup of warm water with ginger, because she had noticed from the sound of his breathing when he came in through the door. Adaze sat on the edge of one of the beds after the children were asleep and held the plastic bag in her lap and did not move for a long time. She was not crying. She was doing something more precise than crying. She was calibrating, the way she calibrated the numbers in the green exercise book, measuring what had happened against what she had expected and recording the difference. In the morning, Constance made tea, and they sat at the table in the kitchen, and Constance asked her to explain. Not everything. The part that mattered right now. Adaze explained it the way she explained things, in order, without embellishment, the way a person explains a set of accounts. The house, the landlord, the husband, the 1,480 naira, the room she could not afford by 11,000 naira a month, the green exercise book. Constance listened without interrupting, and when Adaze finished, she looked into her teacup for a moment, and then she looked up and said, "I need to make a phone call. I will be back in 10 minutes. She was back in 12. She sat down. She said, "I want to ask you something," she said. "You said you were a bookkeeper?" Adaze said, "Yes. The last 7 years for a construction company in the Kantamanto district." She had managed the accounts for a company with a workforce of 63 people and an annual operating budget of 4.2 million cedis. She had never made an error that required correction. She had a reference letter from her employer, which she had folded inside the green exercise book because it was the second most important document she owned. Constance looked at her. She said, "The man I just called is looking for a bookkeeper," she said. "His accountant retired 6 weeks ago, and the person they brought in to cover lasted 9 days," she said. "He is not easy." She said this the way people say it when they mean it and want you to decide with full information, she said. "But he is fair, and he pays properly." Adaze said, "When?" Constance said, "This morning, if you are willing." The building on Cantonments Road where Adaze arrived at 10:40 that morning was a 4-story structure of pale stone with a car park and a glass front door and a security desk with 2 guards in dark blue uniforms. The company was called Mensa Bright Properties. The placard on the second floor read, "Chief Emmanuel Mensa." She was shown into an office by a young woman who told her without looking up that the chief was finishing a call. She sat down in the chair across from the desk and placed the green exercise book in her lap and the plastic bag at her feet and waited. She did not check her phone. She sat with her hands flat on the exercise book and looked at the framed photograph on the wall behind the desk. A building site, recently poured concrete, 3 men in hard hats looking at a set of plans. In the center of the three men, 10 years younger than the man who walked through the door 4 minutes later, but recognizable as the same man, was Chief Emmanuel Mensah. He was 61 years old. He was broad and not tall, and he walked into the room the way certain men walk into rooms that are their own, unhurriedly, with an authority that did not require announcement. He sat down without ceremony. He looked at her the way Constance had looked at her outside the market, directly, for long enough to mean something. He said, "Constance tells me you managed a 4 million account without an error." Ade said, 4.2. She said it not as a correction, but as a precision. The way she said everything. He looked at the exercise book. She set it on the desk. She opened it to the section with the accounts. Not her situation accounts. Those were at the back. The front section was filled with the columns and calculations from her 11 years of bookkeeping, which she had copied by hand into the book 3 years ago from a company computer as a record of her own work. 48 pages. The columns were clean. The figures were cross-referenced at the bottom of each page. He turned through 5 pages, and then he turned to the last page she had filled in and looked at it for 30 seconds. He said, "The reference letter." She took it from inside the back cover and placed it on the desk. He read it fully. He folded it. He set it beside the exercise book. He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Monday." She said, "Monday." He said, 8 o'clock. He named a salary figure. It was more than twice what she had made at the construction company. She held the figure in her mind for a moment, and then she said, "Yes." Not performing calm, actually calm, because the number was simply the next entry in a table she had been building for 11 nights in the light of a street lamp, and it was the first entry that changed the direction of the calculation. What happened in the following months did not happen the way things happen in stories people tell quickly. It happened the way things happen in real life, incrementally, with setbacks embedded in the progress, with weeks that felt like nothing was moving even though things were moving. By the third week, she had a room in a compound on Abercrombie Road, 2 rooms actually, because the landlord offered her the second when she paid 3 months in advance. By the second month, she had enrolled Simi in school on Ogbojo Road and found a creche for Emeka 2 streets from the office. By the 4th month, she had paid Constance back the 12,000 cedis she had lent without being asked. Constance had held the envelope and said, "I did not need this yet." Ade had said, "I know I needed to give it." Chief Emmanuel Mensah was, as Constance had said, not easy. He asked questions that required complete answers, and he could tell the difference between a complete answer and a comfortable one. He did not praise work that was simply correct. He expected work to be correct and said nothing when it was. What he did notice was the exercise book, which she kept on her desk and which she still used for preliminary calculations before transferring figures to the company system. He noticed it because she turned pages in it the way people turn pages in something they value. He asked about it once, on a Thursday in the 2nd month. She explained about the columns of her previous work. He nodded and said nothing and went back to his desk. On the following Monday, he ordered a second monitor installed at her workstation without explaining why. He did not need to explain. She understood that he had decided she was working on insufficient equipment. She said, "Thank you." He said, "It should have been there before." He had lost a daughter. She learned this from Pauline, the office administrator, who told her in the way that office administrators tell new staff essential information, simply, without drama, so you will understand the silences you encounter. His daughter Nana had died 4 years ago at 26 from a condition that had been misdiagnosed 3 times at 2 different hospitals. He had funded a diagnostic center at Korlbu Teaching Hospital after she died. He had also, Pauline said, not been the same after, not worse exactly, more still. Pauline pressed her lips together after she said it and went back to her keyboard. Adizes thought about this information carefully, the way she thought about all information, where it fit, what it explained, what it required of her. It required nothing of her except that she understand the particular quality of the chief's silences and not attempt to fill them with noise. On the afternoon of her 6th month in the office, he called her in at 3:15 and told her he was expanding the company's operations into 3 new sites and that the accountant he had been speaking to about taking over the full accounts had declined the position. He said, "I would like you to take it." He said the salary figure. She said, "I need until tomorrow morning to answer." He said yes. She left and sat at her desk and opened the green exercise book and turned to a fresh page and began a new table. She was not calculating whether to accept. She was mapping what accepting would require her to build in the next 2 years. She came back the next morning at 8 and said yes. She called Constance that evening. Constance answered on the second ring and listened, and at the end she said, "Come for dinner on Saturday." She said it the way she said most things, as an arrangement, not an invitation. On the Saturday, she brought the children, and Constance made jollof rice, and they sat at the table in the kitchen the way they had sat the morning after the first night, except that this time Simi talked through the entire meal about her school, which she had decided was acceptable because the teacher read to them on Fridays, and Emeka ate slowly, and nobody rushed him. Constance watched the children the way a person watches something they have been wanting to see. After dinner, when the children were in the back room watching something on Constance's old television, Adiz sat at the table with her cup of tea and said, "Why did you stop at the market? Why did you look down?" Constance was quiet for a moment. She said, "Because you were sitting up straight." She said, "Everyone who is managing sits forward or sideways or pressed against the edge. You were sitting up straight against that post," she said. "That is not someone who has given up. That is someone who is still building something." She said, "I have been that person. I know what it looks like." Adiz set her cup down. She looked at the table. She said, "My mother had a friend who sat up straight," she said. "I did not always understand why she kept doing it." Constance said, "Now you do." She does. The room on Abakobi Road is not a compound room anymore. It is a flat on the second floor of a building on the cantonment side, 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, with a window that catches the afternoon light, and a small veranda where she keeps a clay pot with a plant she bought from the nursery near the market for 12 setas. On Wednesday evenings, she helps Simi with her arithmetic. On Saturday mornings, she takes Emeka to the park near the school, and they walk to the far end and back, and he talks about whatever he is thinking about, which changes from week to week and is always surprising. She keeps the green exercise book in the drawer of her work desk. She has filled 44 more pages since the morning she sat across from Chief Emmanuel Mensah and placed it on his table. The first 48 pages are her old work. The next 44 are her new life. She has not separated them. They are part of the same record. The man at stall 16, Kweku, who still does not know what she did every night for 11 days, received an anonymous delivery in November of that year. 3 new crates of the same type he stacks at the back of his stall, along with a small handwritten note on plain paper that said simply, "For your kindness, though you did not know you were giving it." He showed the note to the tomato seller next door, and they both agreed it was a mystery and moved on with their day. What Tabena thought about any of this is not part of the story. He is not part of what came after. The ending belongs to the woman who sat up straight against a wooden post in a closed market at midnight, not to the person who closed the door. There are things that cannot be taken from a person. Not by a closing door, not by a landlord with a letter and 2 patient men, not by 11 nights on cold concrete. A person's capacity to keep account of things, to look at a column of numbers and know what they mean and what to do with them. A person's willingness to wash their wrapper by hand in a plastic basin and press their back flat against a post and wait. These are not qualities the world handed out. They were built from everything that tried to break them, and the world that overlooked them. The market that closed and left her there, the boarding houses that had no room at the price she could reach, the people who walked past the Gari Bowl and never looked down. That world does not get to claim credit for what was built despite it. You cannot erase what a person carries inside their hands. You can close a market, you can end a lease, you can leave on a Tuesday, but the thing a person was built from, their patience, their precision, their refusal to stop sitting up straight, that travels with them everywhere they go, into every morning, into every room they eventually walk into. If you know someone who is sitting up straight against a hard post and waiting, send them this story. Leave your answer in the comments below. I want to know, if you were Constance, passing through a busy market on an ordinary morning, and you saw someone like Adiz, would you stop, or would you keep walking? What is the last moment you almost kept walking and didn't? Tell me below. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.